we're going to be actually looking at this today. We're going to be looking at chapter 8 of Daniel. Kind of before we get started, God gave Daniel the unique opportunity of looking at the future. Last week we talked about Daniel's vision, which was primarily about Gentile nations. He had a dream of some animals coming out of the sea that kind of give us an idea in chronological order of nations that would be in power in and around the Mediterranean, which is where God's people, the Israelites, were. And the vision was kind of gave the character, the animal itself kind of gave the character and the succession and the destiny of those nations. But then in Daniel 8, the 8th chapter, starting with the 8th chapter, the future gets very personal in that in chapters 8 through 12, the actual emphasis in the visions and dreams that Daniel has and the interpretations, really the emphasis is on the destiny of God's people, Israel initially, and we'll see that also that the church of God's people of the end time are also impacted and referenced, and we see the end times from the view of Daniel, who is a prophet to the nation of Israel. So let me ask a question to start with. If God offered to show you glimpses of our nation's or the world's future over the next 200 years, would you want to see them? Anybody can answer that.
Okay, Johnny says no.
Okay, no. All right.
Celeste says no.
Okay. Anybody else? Well,
I would.
Would you? Okay. Any reason why would you want to? Why would you want to know, to not know or know? Those who said they wouldn't want to know.
I would like to know, just out of curiosity, to see what I would have to face.
Okay.
It's just like with the book of Revelation, like what we're going through now. In a way, it's not a surprise to me. I mean, I was hoping I wouldn't be involved with it, but I am. But because of the book of Revelation, when things happen, I mean, it's already stated in there, so you shouldn't be shocked by it, and you just prepare yourself for it the best that you can.
Okay. Well,
I don't think I would like to know, because then I would not, I don't know if I would be able to fulfill God's wishes. I think, I don't know if I would be able to or not. I don't know if he would.
Okay, whoever that came on, whoever that was that just came on, mute your phone. We hear your background. Thank you. Whoever came on, mute your phone. Thank you. Whoever just came on, please mute your phone. Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead, Johnny.
I think that God gave us the choice of doing right, obeying His word. And I don't think that it would be less easy if I knew what was going to happen in the future.
Okay.
I might incorporate the word STRESS in my life, which is a word I do not accept.
Okay. Okay. Well, for me, and kind of my thought is that one, I know we already know that God is in control, and whether we saw you're seeing the future wouldn't change anything. But it might help me, and I'm speaking personally, it might help me to prepare for bad things and not get too excited about good things and overdo them if I knew they were going to happen. Uh, if I had known, for example, if I had known when I was younger that certain things were going to happen, I probably may have done some things differently. So for me, my answer would be, if God offered to show me glimpses of my future or our nation's future, I would want to see them. But realizing that I couldn't change them because God's in control. If He showed them to me, they're going to happen. But I might be able to be better prepared. For example, I'll use this as an example: the coronavirus of COVID-19. Had I known, and again speaking personally, had I known that this was going to occur, I might have prepared differently with regard to my health or my living conditions. Had I not known, okay? So this kind of
But I think,
go.
but I think too. Why would you want to see the future before you didn't experience? You wouldn't be able to experience anything, would you?
Again, my personal response was, if I knew, then I would be better able to prepare.
If you knew, but I mean, then you're altering the future.
No, remember.
Would you be altering something?
No, remember what I said in the beginning. God is in control, and you're seeing that would not change anything.
Yes.
About what would happen, but you'd be better able to prepare. So unless somebody else has got something, let's kind of move on with that. But that again, some of us would, some of us wouldn't. I guess is the end of that. Some of us would want to know, and some of us wouldn't want to know. But Daniel was given a unique opportunity of looking at the future. So let's move on to chapter 8 of Daniel, and let's see who's on. Margaret, you're on, right? You still here? If you are, take your phone off mute. All right, Sarah, would you read Daniel chapter?
Okay, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm here.
Okay, Margaret, would you read Daniel chapter 8, verses 1 and 2?
In the third year of the king Belshazzar reign, I, Daniel, had a vision. After the one that had already appeared to me, in my vision, I saw myself in the cradle of Susa, in the province of Elm. In the vision, I was beside the Ewing Canal.
Okay, thanks. Okay, now.
I looked.
Okay, stop. Okay. Was that 1 and 2?
Yes.
Just 1 and 2. Okay. Now, this vision happens. Remember, in chapter 7, Daniel had a vision, and that vision, if you remember, we said probably occurred in the first year of Belshazzar's reign, after Nebuchadnezzar had died, and Belshazzar became the king. This dream occurs 2 years later. It occurs 2 years after that first dream. Remember, if somebody wants to go back to well, let's not go back there. What we do know already that the first dream in chapter 7 was in the first year of King Belshazzar's reign, and he saw the vision, and we talked about that last week when he saw the animals coming out of the sea. Now let's look at the second dream. Let's look at and then Sarah, this time I will ask you, Sarah, if you would read Daniel chapter 8 and read verses 3 through 7. This is the dream that Daniel had in the third year of Belshazzar's reign. Daniel 8, 3 through 7.
Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram with 2 horns, and 2 horns were high. But one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand.
Okay, so now what we'll find is these animals that Daniel saw coming from the river this time are going to be correspond to the same nations that were depicted as other animals in Daniel's first dream. Now, the ram. Okay, and you remember in the first dream, right? That in the very Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. Remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2 on the statue that was the head of gold, which we determined was Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Then there was the chest and the arms of silver in chapter 2 of Daniel. Remember that? Okay, and we said and we said what nation was that we said, what empire did we say that was?
Babylon was gold.
Okay, and the silver was
Persia.
Medo-Persia. So the ram. Remember, so this ram has 2 horns. One represents Media, and the other represents Persia. Now, what the scripture says is that one of the horns was longer than the other one, and so these 2 allies, Media and Persia. Persia became the dominant nation of the 2. So that horn that had become longer actually is Persia. So we got Medo-Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire, which represents the ram, and it was a silver belly. The silver chest and arms. Okay. Now in Daniel's vision, that was Nebuchadnezzar's dream. In Daniel's first vision, the first beast was the second beast was a bear, which represents Medo-Persia. The head of the statue was gold, that was Babylon. The chest was silver, that was Medo-Persia. If we look at Daniel, go back to Daniel chapter 7, and we want to look at verses 4 and 5. And Jules, would you read in Daniel 7, 4 and 5?
4 and 5.
Yes.
Okay. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh.
Okay, so now the ram that Daniel sees is the bear that was in Daniel chapter 7. Follow me so far? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Now at this time, the ram was a superpower. Okay, the ram was a superpower at this time. Then in Daniel's dream, the next animal that comes up is the goat, right? Now the goat represents which nation? So we had Babylon, Medo-Persia. What now?
Greece.
Right. So the goat is going to represent Greece. The goat defeated and killed and trampled the ram, right? Okay. And the goat had only one big horn. That's if we go back. Sarah, go back and read in chapter 8, verses 5 through 7 again, please.
And I was considering suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his two horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him.
Okay.
And there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand.
I'm sorry. I'm excited. I'm trying to jump in before you finish. Okay.
No worries.
No, I'm sorry. Okay. So the goat now represents Greece. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, okay, Greece was the belly and the thighs of bronze, right? And we see that in Daniel 7 verse 6 again, and I'll read that. The third of the strange beast appeared, and it looked like that was Nebuchadnezzar's dream. In Daniel's dream, in chapter 7, okay, the leopard represented Greece. In Daniel chapter 7 verse 6 it says, the third of these strange beasts appeared, and it looked like a leopard. It had 4 birds' wings on its back, and it had 4 heads. Great authority was given to this beast. Okay, all right. So we've got again. We're looking back at Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel's first vision, and now this one talking about the same nations. So I want to talk a little bit about Greece, okay, which specifically talk about Alexander the Great in Greece, because he's kind of represented in this, because the goat, okay, had one large horn, right? And okay, and the goat conquered and killed the ram. This one large horn is kind of representative of Alexander the Great. Okay, so Alexander the Great conquered much of the known world at that time for Greece, including the Medo-Persian Empire, which included Babylon, which is actually the nation of Iran is where Babylon was right now, Persia, Iraq is where Babylon was. Babylon was situated in what is now Iraq, right? And Alexander the Great, represented by the goat, conquered this. So Daniel saw this then, and so we can kind of verify it by historical records that the prophecy that Daniel received, and we'll see the rest of them, some of them have come true, and that's going to point us then to the end times, and we'll see some of that also in Daniel's prophecies. But something happened at the very height of Alexander the Great's power. And we'll see that in verse 8 of Daniel chapter 8. Jeanette, can you read Daniel chapter 8, verse 8?
The goat became very great, but at the height
of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Wow.
Okay, so what happened now? So what happened to the goat at the height of his power? Right? Broke, which meant that
horns broke.
The horn represented Alexander the Great, right? Okay, if Alexander the Great was the horn, right? It means something happened to him, and 4 horns grew from it. Now we got to look at that from a historical perspective to see what that is, what happened, and as we look at Daniel's the prophecies from Daniel. So at the height of his power, the big horn was broken off, and 4 other horns appeared. Now that kingdom, again, we've said was Alexander the Great, and we know that Alexander the Great died when he was young. Alexander the Great died like when he was 33 years old of alcoholism and fever, and he died in Babylon. And in the years afterwards, okay, that empire was divided into 4 parts, and so we looked at 4 horns, right? The 4 horns that appeared, right? In the subsequent years, that empire was divided into 4 parts, and they were split among 4 of Alexander the Great's military successors. 2 of them, okay, 2 of them are very important with regard to the nation of Israel. One was Egypt, okay. One was Egypt under a family called the Ptolemies. Let me spell it: Ptolemies. The last one of these was actually Cleopatra. And then the other division, one of the 4 realms was Syria, okay, which is now Syria, which obviously is a nation that's closely aligned, closely geographically related to Israel, and who at one time conquered the nation of Israel. And we'll talk more about that specifically when we get to chapter 11. Now, the empire, Alexander the Great's empire, gets split into 4 kingdoms, and these 4 kingdoms do retain their sovereignty. The 4 kingdoms are broken into Asia Minor, okay, the Middle East, which we kind of talked about, in Egypt and Syria, Macedonia, which partly includes actually Greece, and then Egypt. Okay, now all 4 of these, by the way, all 4 of these kingdoms eventually become what? What's the next animal that we saw in what's the next symbolic area we saw in the statue, and the next animal in Daniel's dreams? The Roman Empire, right? Okay, all 4 of these kingdoms would eventually get incorporated into the Roman Empire. Okay, follow me? I don't want to. If anybody got any questions, I don't want to confuse anybody. So historically, here's the timing historically. Okay, the Babylonian Empire lasted from, these are all BC, from 605 to 536 BC. Medo-Persia from 605 to 536. 605 to 536 BC. Medo-Persia from 536 to 330 BC. Greece and these 4 kingdoms.
Could you repeat that last?
Medo-Persia was 536 to 330 BC. 330 BC to 30 BC is Greece. Now, Greece is going to include, going to be the Alexander's the Great times and these four kingdoms. We're going to be Greece, right? From 330 to 30 BC. Then the Roman Empire comes into being in 30 BC. Right? Okay. Okay. Now, the Roman Empire itself actually ended in 476 AD.
476
AD.
AD.
Right. So historically, this is the timing of all this stuff. Historically. Okay. Let's go back and we're going to look a little bit about Alexander the Great, the Alexander the Great, and then these four little horns, these four kingdoms that come from Alexander the Great's kingdom, but these four kingdoms that are broken up. There's one that's very significant, and we'll start. It'll be in Daniel chapter 8, verses 9 through 12. And have you read, Jeanette?
Yes, I read 8. Yes.
Oh, okay. Marlene, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Can you read Daniel 8?
Yes.
Daniel 8, chapter 8, verses 9 through 12. 8, 9 through 12.
Okay. And out of one of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. And it flew up to the host of heaven, and it cast out some of the host and some of the stars to the ground, and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground, and he did all this and prospered. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the...
Oh, stop, Marlene. Stop. I just wanted you to read through 12. 8, 9 through 12. Okay. 9 through 12. And read verse 12 again for me.
Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered.
Okay. So now, out of these four horns, right? Out of the four horns that we talked about before, the four kingdoms that came about after Alexander the Great, one of those became from one of those horns, right? I mean, meaning an individual in one of those kingdoms came someone whose power became very great. And here's what's important and why it was important to Daniel. That horn extended toward the south and east and toward the land of Israel. Okay? Remember, as I said, Daniel was a prophet to the nation of Israel, and what he's going to be talking about now is what God's revelation to him about what's going to happen to his people, the nation of Israel, in the future. So that little horn, or that ruler, was focused on the Jews. Marlene, what did verse 9 of chapter 8 say? Again, verse 9 of Daniel 8.
Verse 9.
Yes.
And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land.
Okay. All right. Now, so that's why this horn was important in Daniel's dream. Because this horn, or this person, attacked the God's people of Israel, and he actually even made himself equal to the God of the Jews. And in the end, if you notice when in that passage that she read, this person even banned the religious practices, including the sacrifices. Now, so now let's look. And so Daniel's this is a dream, right? And now in his vision, Daniel sees two what kind of described as holy ones are angels talking. So who hasn't read? Mr. Duncan.
I haven't read.
Who?
Miss Duncan.
Okay, Miss Duncan, can you read?
Miss Duncan.
Miss Duncan, can you read verses 13 and 14 of chapter 8?
Okay. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be this vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation to give both these? I don't have my glasses on.
Okay.
To give the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. And he said to me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed.
Okay, all right. So
you said
13 and 14.
Right.
Okay, so all right. So we've seen the vision. Okay, and now Daniel sees these two saints or angels or holy ones, which is they're described in the New Living Translation, but probably two angels that talking. One asks, well, how long is this stuff going to happen? How long are the events going to last in this vision? Meaning, especially he's talking about now the time where the sacrifices and the religious practice have been banned. And then the other one says it will take 2,300. The New Living Translation says it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the temple will be made right again. All right? Okay, so now, well, these two talk. Now, Daniel still obviously doesn't understand, so then enters another figure here who's going to explain, going to reveal what's going to happen to this little horn. Now, we're focused on the little horn now. We're going to explain what's going to happen to this little horn and a time frame for the events we just read about in verses 9 through 12 that these two angels are talking about now. The one saying it's going to take 2,300 evenings and mornings, or 2,300 days, or whatever that is. So now Gabriel comes and he's going to explain this to Daniel. All right. So who else hasn't read?
Johnny.
I haven't read.
Okay, but Johnny, I want you to read some, and then Trudy. Johnny, if you would read verses Daniel chapter 8, verses 15 through 20, and then Trudy, if you would read 21 through 27. So Johnny, 15 through 20, please.
As I, Daniel, was trying to understand the meaning of this vision, someone who looked like a man stood in front of me, and I heard a human voice calling out from the Ulai River, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of his dream. Tell him the meaning of his vision. As Gabriel approached the place where I was standing, I became so terrified that I fell from my face to the ground. Son of man, he said, you must understand that the events you have seen in your vision relate to the end of the time. While he was speaking, I fainted and lay there with my face to the ground. But Gabriel roused me to touch and helped me to my feet. Then he said, I am here to tell you what will happen later in time of wrath. What you have seen pertains to the very end of time. The two-horned lamb represents the kings of Media and Persia.
Okay, Trudy?
And the buff goat is the king of Grisha, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Turn the page. Wait a minute. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressions are to come, the fool, a king of fierce countenance and understanding, dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And those who cause me, also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princesses, but he shall be broken without hand. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many, many days. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. That's what I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you both. All right, a couple of things, and then we'll go talk about it. A couple of things to notice in that section is what it talks about is this king, this person that does all of this stuff to stopping the sacrifices, doesn't do that in his own power, so it would indicate that he's gotten he's pushed on or driven by Satan, right? And then that and in the end, this person will even take on what it calls a prince of princes in battle. Now, we think that would mean Jesus Christ, and that he will be defeated, but not by human power. So that gives us some idea of some supernatural intervention. First of all, Satan helps this guy, and in the end, he's defeated, but not by human power. Would be a supernatural power, Jesus Christ. So that's just an observation as we're going through this. Now these verses, so follow me here. And so if there's any place where I'm confusing you or you don't understand, you need explanation, stop me. Okay, these verses predict what happens or what was going to happen to the Jews after they return from exile from Babylon. Now they returned from exile from Babylon in the second half of the 2nd century BC. So they came back from Babylon. So what he's predicting, what Daniel's, this vision about the little horn, is what happens to the Jews, and what's going to happen to the Jews after they return from exile. Now most people in the research that I've done, most people believe that the small horn was a king by the name of Antiochus IV. He was known by a couple of other names. He reigned from 175 BC to 164 BC, so just 9 years. He was called Epiphanes, we've heard that before, which means magnificent, by friends, and he was called Epimenides, Epimanes, which means madman, by his enemies. So also because of what he did, a lot of people see what happened with him and the Jews as him being a type of Antichrist. Because, in Revelation, it's talking about Antichrist causing, making war against the saints, and Antichrist doing things that are against God. So a lot of people see this guy and his interaction with the Jews as a type of Antichrist. That he was not the Antichrist, but a type of Antichrist. Because Antichrist's actions against Christ and his people in the end are similar to what this guy did. Now this fellow, Antiochus IV, who reigned from 175 to 164 BC, came from Syria. Okay, he was part of the Syrian Empire. Now, we want to talk about this too, and there's a lot of numbers and stuff in the end of Daniel. There's weeks and things, but we'll talk about those later. But right now, there's talk about 2,300 days, or literally it's mornings and evenings. And it's really, remember Daniel's writing to the Jews, it's prophecy to the Jews, and it's morning and evening sacrifices. The Jewish law required sacrifices in the morning and sacrifices in the evening. So this 2,300 days really is only 1,150 days. Understand? Does it make sense? Okay, make sense? No. Okay. So, all right. So it's really 1,150 days, and I don't want to try to confuse you with dates and numbers, but want to kind of show you what this really is, and we're going to try to relate it later on to the end times. But this happened where the daily sacrifices were stopped. They were banned by this man. So we know how important the daily sacrifice was to the Jews. So this man actually stopped them, and I believe that this happened between 168 BC and 165 BC. Remember, this fellow died in 165 BC. The temple was desecrated by pagan sacrifices during that time. Historically, the sacrifices were stopped, the Jewish sacrifices were stopped, and they actually did pagan sacrifices in the temple on the altar. This fellow Epiphanes died in 164 BC. Now, and here's what happened, and this is why he did what he did, as fueled by Satan. Okay, at one time in his attempt to conquer the entire Middle East, went to Egypt to try to conquer Egypt. And while he was there, okay, in Palestine, there was a rumor that spread that he had been killed, and there was a revolt in Israel. There was a revolt in Israel, and as a result of that, he came back and quelled the revolt. And what he decided to do at that time was to eliminate the worship of the Jews to Jehovah God, so that he was the predominant figure to them. All right? Follow me so forth? So he stopped the sacrifices. He stopped them. Now, what we read earlier, it mentions that he was later defeated. And this defeat happened when the Jews revolted. If you've all heard about the Maccabees were a group of Jewish people that revolted against the Syrians and won and overthrew their kingdom and reclaimed the Palestine until they were overrun by the Romans, and reinstituted the sacrifices. Any questions? No questions? Okay. Now,
No.
want to try it. I'm want to try to now equate this with the end times, because there's some relevance to what happened then and what happens in the end times. As a matter of fact, in verse 19 of chapter 8, it says, that Gabriel says, then he said, I'm here to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath. And then what he says, what you have seen pertains to the very end of times. So there's some relevance to the very end of times, to what happens with this little horn that becomes powerful. Okay? Now, so I want us to read now. We've talked about the temple being desecrated, the sacrifices being stopped, and now that being overturned by the Maccabees. And so now I want us to read. Who hasn't read? Has everybody read?
Yes, I have my glasses now.
Oh, okay. Well, you read Daniel 8. Daniel chapter 8, 23 through 25.
Okay. And in the later time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper, and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand.
Okay.
And the vision of the eagle. Oh, okay, 25.
Yeah, 25. All right. Okay. Now, so now Gabriel seems to be talking about another king, right? Because he says at the end of their rule, at the end of the rule of the four horns, okay, at the end of their rule, and now we're talking about the Roman Empire, and he says at the end of their rule, when they seems to be talking about someone else, right, who will take on the prince of princes in battle. And he will be broken down by humans. So now Gabriel seems to be talking about a king that's going to come in much, much later, who's going to actually battle against what he calls the prince of princes, which we know to be Jesus Christ. So this king is who we would determine is going to be the Antichrist. As far as we know, the Antichrist has not come, and it's not in the world, but that he will come at the end of the world. Now, like the fellow that desecrated the temple, this person is going to hate God's people also, and in the end, he's going to be broken out by human power, which means that God's going to kill him. Then that kingdom's going to be given to God's own people. So there's two times Gabriel makes it clear that this vision applies to the end of time or the distant future. Not something in the immediate future, but the distant future. Daniel chapter 8, verse 19. Read that, Sarah, please.
And he said, "Look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the later time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be."
Okay, and Jeanette, would you read verse 26 of Daniel 8? If you're on mute, take yourself off mute.
On mute. Okay.
Daniel 8, verse 26.
Okay. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that have been given you is the truth. It's true. But seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future.
Okay. All right. So he's talking about the end of time. Now, many scholars believe that the fellow I talked to you about before, Epiphanes, is a picture of the final evil ruler who will appear on the world scene just before Christ's return, Antichrist. Okay, so we know that hasn't happened. We know that some of the stuff that Daniel had predicted or saw has happened. We know about stopping the sacrifices being stopped and the temple being desecrated. That has happened. But then this final king we have not seen yet. So
I have 3 people call me. 5 people call me.
We haven't seen yet. All right. And we know that Daniel has said that these things will happen in the time of the end or the distant future. So, what is Daniel told to do? I'm going to read verses 26 and 27 of Daniel chapter 8. Here's what Gabriel tells Daniel to do. After telling him all of this stuff, here's what Gabriel tells Daniel to do. 8, 26 and 27. This vision is about, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation, this vision about the 2,300 evenings and mornings is true, but none of these things will happen for a long time. So, keep this vision a secret. Now, what he's talking about is keep it a secret from the people then, not now, obviously, because it's been revealed to us. So he was saying, keep it a secret for now. He's told to seal it up because it is for a future time. So, so what we've seen is that there are times we talked about today, that there are times in history of the fulfillment of a lot of it. But the last piece of the vision, where there's a battle against the Prince of Princes, that has not happened yet, and so that points to a future time. So how was Daniel affected by the interpretation of this dream? Verse 27 of chapter 8 says, "Then I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for several days. Afterward I got up and performed my duties for the king, but I was greatly troubled by the vision and could not understand." So Daniel still didn't understand the dream. And he was sick for a few days, and he went back, before he went back to his job with the king. So, had you, been Jewish, and had you gone back to Israel after being returned from Babylon, and you read Daniel's prophecy, read the book of Daniel, and saw this prophecy of what was going to happen to you, would you not have been encouraged? Would you?
I would have
prophet like Daniel.
right. That was quite an experience. That was quite an experience. But
yes.
But let's say you've gone back to Israel from Babylon. Now you're being tormented by this guy who stopped the sacrifices, right? But you run across Daniel's prophecy and you read what's going to happen. Would you not be encouraged? At some point in time, this guy's going to be taken care of, right?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So what I'm getting at is our view should be today in Daniel, and if we read Revelations, and in going through this COVID-19 thing, and there will be other things that I believe are going to come up before the end of days, and are going to cause fear and doubt and frustration. But because we've seen Daniel's prophecy and John's prophecy is what would happen at the end, we can be encouraged, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So while there's some frightening things or things that would exhaust you, as Margaret said, from Daniel's prophecy, and even more so in Revelations, if and when we do that, what we see in the end is that God's people will be delivered, and those oppressing God's people will be destroyed, not by human hands, which means God himself is going to intervene and deliver his people. So that's it for chapter 8 of Daniel. I know if you have any questions, things that still puzzle you, and you think about them later, you can call me or text me or email me, and we can talk about it. We've jammed a lot into this hour today in chapter 8, but go back and read it again. Think about it. Remember the things what we've talked about. That most of these things have already happened, but they also point to the end time and the fact that God is going to deliver us. Anybody got any questions or comments today before we leave?